strangely enough, in those days, I had a black woman as a teacher, which was quite something. We didn't have teachers who were black. And her name was Miss Black, so happened. So that day, I don't know, I did something, I talked out of turn, I don't know what it was. She made me stay in. So I came home very indignantly, and I wanted my mother to go to school and take the beads back. I remember that very distinctly. Another episode in public school. See, as I'm talking, these things are coming up. Another episode in public school, she made me the monitor the house. My father was home. I said, I'm not going back to school. I did a terrible thing. So my father, said, well, what did you do? I told him. So he took a cup and a saucer from the house, and he went with me to the teacher. So she said that she didn't mind the cup and saucer being broke, but she didn't have what to drink her coffee with. So that disturbed her more than anything else. So that was another episode. Little things like that, you go through.
So finish the great story.
All right. So in that building, we had a family. There were 8 children in that family. They were on the ground floor. And Mrs. Goldstein was like a midwife almost because she had so many children. And she was the one that helped with my sister's birth. So when my mother threw the key down, it was a key, it fell into the grate.
Why did she throw the key down?
Because she was on the 4th floor, and I said, Ma, I need a potsy. Throw me down a potsy. She wrapped it. She wrapped it in the newspaper, and the newspaper flew, and the thing went down. So, I was crying naturally. So, what's his name? Tossie, one of the boys, saw me crying, so he came out, and he had a magnet, and he tried to pull us up. And when I used to tell the story to Eric and to Heidi, I would magnify it and say, well, he put the magnet down and he got the penny, and just as he reached the top, it went back down again. And they love when I tell them that way. They wanted me to repeat it all the time. So, but that's what happened. So then I got that's the great story. Now, if you want to know what else is on there,
no, that's okay. No,
yeah,
I just wanted that.
yeah, that great story.
Because that's something that
yeah,
Heidi and Eric loved.
Yeah, they loved it. They loved that story. What else? I got to start thinking. Well, let's see. All right, I'll tell you about my going to college. I was 15 years old when I graduated from high school, which is not the normal time people graduate from high schools, but because I was in 7A, 7B, 8A, 8B, and another thing, I didn't speak English well when I went to school. I had to learn, I spoke Yiddish a lot, and I had to learn how to speak English, and I learned it in school, really.
You spoke Yiddish
Mostly at home, right. And when I said about my mother had a sister-in-law, this sister-in-law drove her crazy. He said, why aren't you speaking English to her? And my mother would say, she'll learn English in school, but if she learns Yiddish, she'll always know Yiddish, which I think is great. I really love the language, and I have a lot of fun with it. And most of the non-Jewish people I'm around are learning a word here and there from me, and we always have a lot of fun with that. So anyhow, okay, I'm 15 years old, and I want to go to college, and I want to go to teach. I always wanted to be a teacher. When I was little, we had a brown ice box on the Lower East Side of Manhattan with a pan underneath. The iceman used to come up to the 4th floor and put ice in the thing, and we had a pan, had to empty the water. Those days were not easy days. So I used to write on the blackboard as a kid. I was very resourceful with things to do. So I would have chalk, and my mother had these sweaters that button down the front, So I'd take the kitchen chairs and line them up in front of the icebox and put sweaters on each chair, with the hands out like the sleeves, and those would be my children, see, and I would be playing school with the blackboard and write whatever I wrote on there. So I was by this time I was starting to go to school, 6 years old, so 6, 7. I went to school. When I started to go to school, my mother got me a little briefcase, and all of a sudden she sees I can't walk. I'm walking with this thing, it's heavy. She says, "What in the world?" I had found books. I wanted to go to school and stuck all kinds of books into the briefcase. And I could hardly carry the darn thing. So that was that.
Take to school.
Yeah, to take to school, the first
Be
grade.
a regular student.
Yeah, yeah. So that was, and I was a pretty nice student most of the time.
What about your brother and sister? Tell us a little
I'll
bit
tell you
about
about my brother and sister. Okay. Then my brother came on the scene, and I don't remember that much about him. When he was little, he was cute. He was roly-poly, but he was a breech, as I said. He wasn't. He was born feet first, so he was a breech, and they had that. And then my sister was born on Yom Kippur, as I think I mentioned that before. And then, before you knew it, we moved to Brooklyn. And Danny went to public school, and he played ball on the streets, and he had a couple of friends. And my sister was a cute kid; she really was. And my sister got run over. That was a big thing at that time. My sister was very cute, and she had curls. My mother made her curls. She did roll her hair was, and one day I came home from junior high school, and everybody is greeting me on the street, and they say to me, "How's your sister?" I said, "What do you mean, how's my sister?" When I left the house, she was fine. Then it suddenly started occurring to me, something must have happened. Well, she was run over by a car. What happened was there was somebody standing on this sidewalk and called to her, and she ran across, and the car didn't stop in time. So she was hovering between life and death
really.
for 3 days. Yeah, the doctor
She
came to
actually
the.
hit.
Yeah, so she was really hovering.
What was wrong with her?
Well, she was sort of semi-conscious, and she was really sick,
Did
and
you visit her in the hospital?
they didn't take her to the hospital. She stayed home. The doctor came to the house, and 3 days she was, and then she came to, and she was okay. My mother was a good nurse and took very good care of her. So that was a kind of a highlight episode in our lives. And then, okay, so then let's see, where am I at? I went to James Madison.
I wanted to tell
Yeah.
you more about the family. Any experiences with
Well, we used to go to visit cousins who lived in Long Island. That was a big thing. We went to the country. My mother had cousins, and the whole, Shmuel Kaplan family. We all was friendly with them.
What were they all like?
Well,
What did they do?
what did they do? Let's see. Well, they were all people that went to school. We had a Dr. Abraham Kaplan, who, it's hard to think of everything. He was like the pride of the family because he graduated from Harvard Medical School, and he was someone that was looked up to all the time. He had a sister, Mary, who married Arthur Rogerson, and we were quite friendly with that branch of the family. In fact, in recent years, I've gotten friendly with all of them through email. We've been corresponding and so on.
Who's that?
Phoebe and Vicky. Vicky, who writes the children's books, and Phoebe, who's in business. And they came out here with her aunt, who was on her father's side. Now, they're all on my mother's side. So they came out here and they stayed with me overnight. And they were. He was a retired. He's a retired physician. He was a cardiologist, Phoebe's husband, and then Vicky's son was the one that wrote that travel logs all and all. I used to send you all the travel logs that he wrote and so on. So that was that branch, and everybody went to school there. They were all school people.
What were the relationships to you?
They were my mother's first cousins, and they were my second cousins, you know. And my cousin Mary Margolis, so when I was little, I used to go there to her all the time. She lost her mother when she was 10 years old, and she was like with Uncle Jake, who was, another one in the family who was spent a lot of time at my mother's house. He liked being near my mother. He felt comfortable in that family part of the house with my father and mother, you know. And so so I used to be a lot with Mary. In fact, I spoke to her the other day. She sent me a thing about a Havas Sholem that this Eldridge Street thing that I talked about, they're doing a tour. And that's their fundraising for a Havas Sholem. So they arranged for a tour for the Eldridge Street Stroll. And I'll show you tomorrow. Marilyn sent me a whole thing about the tours. You might be interested. They're giving in Lower Manhattan on the life in Lower Manhattan and in the tenement houses and everything. It's like a museum.
They have a tenant museum.
Maybe
Did
that's
you go
it.
with me?
Yes.
We went to the tenant
Well, that's the
museum.
one then.
It's really
That's
interesting.
it. Well, that's it. That was my life. I lived in those tenements. I left out a very important thing. I was almost kidnapped. When we lived in the tenement house at 2 Eldridge Street, we had a little candy store down right at the base of the apartment. There was Mr. and Mrs. Feldstein. And they she was an odd woman. She was a big, tall, husky woman. He was a little bit of a guy. I remember that was the conversation. And also, you talk to who were my friends before I go into this other thing. The concierge, we call them janitors, but they were lovely people, had 2 daughters, Itty and Fanny. And Itty and Fanny were really my friends. Now that you talk about it, I remember we played things. We'd go Friday night, we'd come up to my mother's house and we'd go into different clothes and do put on charades and stuff like that. And we played together. We played dolls. We played this and that. I never owned a doll, by the way, until I was 10 years old.
Why?
I don't know. No one ever thought about it, I guess. But my father won some kind of case in court. And on the way home, for some reason or other, he bought a doll. It must have been someone on the street or whatnot. So he brought me a doll. That's the first doll I remember. And it was almost as tall as me. It was a big doll. I don't ever know what ever happened to it. But that was my only doll that I ever had. I told you I was resourceful. I played school and did things like that. All right, now going back, he doesn't want me to go to college.
No, you were telling us about the kidnapping?
Oh, the kidnapping. That was on the Lower East Side. I was going upstairs, walking up the steps, and all of a sudden this man grabs me between the 2nd and 3rd floor. I remember it so well. And he had a rope. He was starting to tie me. And I bit him. And with that, he was alarmed, and I slipped out, and I ran for all I was worth down into the candy store, and I hid there until he left. That was a very dramatic time. I remember it so distinctly.
What did you tell people?
I didn't. I told them that this man tried to tie me up, you know. But, you know, they were simple people. They didn't know from calling the police right away or anything like that, you know. They just didn't. So that happened then. And, of course, then Mrs. Feldstein took me upstairs. She didn't let me walk by myself, and I went upstairs and so on.
Were
And
other people kidnapped? And did you know anything?
there were kidnappings, and they were going on. There was
What did
this.
they do?
I don't remember, but that's what happened. Now, that I remember very, very plainly. So that was
there
that.
much crime in your neighborhood growing up?
Not particularly. You know, the usual stuff. The kids with the running noses from poor families, you know,
Well,
that
there are
kind of
gangs.
thing.
There's a movie coming out about the gangs of New York.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
remember
well, it's
gangs?
like Cavalier and Clay. Yes, they were gangs, of course. They lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Siegel and that whole bunch, you know, they were all there. But I didn't know them. They weren't people that I came in contact with. No, they weren't my kind of people. I only remember one thing about the Daily News. I could never understand. The Daily News would come out at night with tomorrow's news. I'd say, how do they know what's going to happen tomorrow? They would have, you know, tomorrow's date, the evening paper, but it was supposed to be tomorrow's news. And that used to bother me.
Now, was your neighborhood a mixed neighborhood, or was it
Oh
almost
no, it was a
entirely
mixed
Jewish.
neighborhood. Let me tell you, the street, you know, they had, it was not entirely Jewish. We had people were immigrants. They were coming in from all over. So you had Scandinavians and you had Swedes and you had, just like the schools, that's the way the schools were. All different mixtures of people in those days.
We're gonna take a break.
Okay. Richard, I'm sending my own thank you card. I shouldn't send to you and Kenneth.
No, I'll send it out to
I
everybody
wrote,
else.
dear Paula and Joey, words can hardly express the great evening we spent at your beautiful home. Good food, laughter, and a great host and hostess. Thanks so much. Love, Paul.
That's a great card.
Okay.
Do you have their address? The mute button on this?
Here it is.
Let me see what it is. I'll put the pillow back. As long as you know it didn't sleep.
You didn't sleep in it at all?
One night I did.
I take the linens off, put them in the machine, put them away for when you come the next time.
Okay.
I don't think anyone else is coming in between.
Rose?
Yeah, see, I don't buy new sheets for the single beds because I don't use them when you,
Yeah, sure.
just when you guys come. And the towels also sit up there, they're just guest towels. Juice, any juice, orange juice or anything? Should take some.
Yeah.
Should I give you some?
Yeah, could you give me some crayon apples?
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Those are some pictures that we got together there.
Yeah, why did they put tape on the front of them though?
recruit among those people who are now sympathetic, or what is even more dangerous, when a copycat cell would form itself and try to reach the center. That would mean that
recording music, sharing photos, gaming, and beyond. And for a limited time, you'll get free shipping. Get great deals on notebooks, too. Dude, you're getting a Dell.
Hey guys, maybe next.
That country says he cannot rule out a terror attack. Yemeni officials, however, say a leak on the oil tankers will cause that explosion. Leading Democrats, they're telling the party faithful to turn Osama bin Laden alive. The former head of Saudi Arabia's intelligence service says bin Laden is, and he is preparing for a surprise comeback. He says this opinion is based on his own information.
So I can concentrate on exploring and seeing if I can put an infrastructure together to run, and have asked them to come up with an interim president. I want to give them, but I think we should always deal with issues, both foreign and domestic, based on are we protecting the people's rights that we are addressing. For example, in the book I talk about trips to Sudan, I like to stand for what I believe. You know, Martin Luther King said that there are two types of leaders. There are thermostats and there are thermometers. Thermometers judge the temperature, thermostats change the temperature.
Such shipping has resumed today after days of port problems. So does this mean the shutdown is nearing an end? We're going to get a live update for you next. And when spending really started to slow, an update on the latest shopping strategies, that's also coming up next.
Saddam turned to America's fiercely independent news channel, MSNBC.
I think this is the one.